Hi everyone, today I want to go over the changes that have been made to my Doomfletch Split Arrow Mines build since I originally created the video guide back in Metamorph. This is a supplemental guide, not a replacement, so make sure to watch the original video if you haven't. I'll have a link in the description. This video will include the changes that we made in Delirium, which were really few, and changes made for Harvest League, which are going to be more significant. I do want to start off by thanking everyone that subbed or messaged me in various ways about the build. The interest has really helped motivate me to keep the build guide up to date, and I really appreciate it. So, back to the build. How's it doing? There were a few nerfs this patch, and I've gotten a lot of questions about whether or not it's still viable. Well, good news. Despite those nerfs, I believe this version of the build, as I've theory crafted it today, is better both defensively and offensively than it was in Metamorph. The nerfs did cost us about 10% damage versus the pre-nerf values, but we can more than make up for that with the new mechanics and different pathing. I also wanted to mention the build's performance in Delirium. There were a lot of people that started this build in Delirium and noticed that it didn't handle the fog very well, and that's an unfortunate truth of the Delirium mechanic. Even I noticed that and abandoned the build early because the mine playstyles just roughen the fog, and the avoidance mechanics that this build uses just weren't up to snuff with all the damage that Delirium dealt. Thankfully though, I think Harvest will be significantly better in that regard. We go back to a normal difficulty for mapping, and the League mechanic is a miner's favorite, clicking to spawn enemies. This means we can preload mines and delete anything the moment it appears. Absolutely perfect for this build. So if you tried this build in Delirium, I think it's worth another shot. It should definitely dominate the League mechanic. One other thing I wanted to address is the Barrage skill link. I get this question a lot. Why is Barrage so slow? I just wanted to reiterate. Yes, Barrage is slow, unfortunately. Calling it the build's single target skill is kind of a misnomer though. Ideally, we only use Barrage when a boss is in an immunity phase and only for preloading. As soon as the boss goes active, trigger your Barrage mines and then swap to the clear bow. Barrage feels really bad being used in an active fight, and you shouldn't be using it if the boss is moving or trying to attack you. Our clear bow still does crazy damage, so we aren't crippling our ability to kill bosses by relegating the Barrage setup to only specific circumstances. So I'm going to throw a quick table of contents up here so you can see what will be covered. I'll also have links in the description to timestamps for each section of the guide. First thing we're going to cover is the 3.11 nerfs and how they affect the build. In 3.11, there were really only 4 nerfs that affected this build significantly. First is going to be the change to Herald of Purity. Well, good news. It's actually a buff. Doesn't look like one, but it is. It's not that great. My main character gets about 3% more DPS from it, but it is a buff. We stack so much flat physical on the build that 12% more physical damage is actually better than 25 to 37 flat physical damage. Next, we're going to look at the Circle of Guilt. This one, unfortunately, is a flat-out nerf, but it's not as much as you would think. The map that I did last league actually showed that a good plus percentage physical damage roll on a Circle of Guilt was identical to a buff effect roll. This means that we're going to be aiming for physical damage on the ring instead of buff effect. The mana reservation nerf does hurt a bit, but we can offset that with some changes that we'll be making to the skill links in the tree. More on that later. Overall, a small nerf, but only to utility. Circle of Guilt will still be good for damage. Third is the nerf to the Shikari Pantheon. Not a huge deal, it just no longer provides poison immunity. This means the Alhazmin fight and his minions and his influence maps will be a little of a pain for the build because we don't get very much chaos resistance. But since you one-shot the boss, not a big deal in the boss fight itself. On the bright side, they did fix the snakes that spawn in his influence maps to not pop up and insta-kill you with their spit, so I think it's a fairly good trade-off. Last, and definitely not least, the nerfs to the skill tree. The mine and crit multiplier passives. This one hurt us a lot. I personally lost about 10% damage versus the 3.10 tree. The piercing shots cluster also isn't in coded shrapnel range anymore, and we have to get more points spent to get to plus 2 pierce. We make up for this with a new tree, but it would have been nice to not get nerfed at all. That really covers the nerfs that we received. Nothing build breaking, and again, we have some new powerful building options that make us more powerful than we were before. I'll go over those in the other sections. The next thing I want to go over are cluster jewels. I know they're a last league mechanic, but I did get a lot of questions as to why I was ignoring them. They're not worth it, in my opinion. We're very point thin, and our tree relies on placing points within coated shrapnel radius as much as possible. Since radius jewels don't work with cluster jewels, it limits our options significantly. There were some acceptable ones last league that were very small increases on perfect clusters, but with the nerfs to cluster passives, I'm unable to find a tree setup that gives us more damage than just normal passive points. The only thing that we might consider would be a 1 or a 3-point voices above acrobatics with 3 small life clusters in it, as we're short on life, but that's an extremely expensive option. I won't be adding cluster jewel recommendations to the build guide. Next, let's take a look at the skill gems. There's a pretty small change to the 4 link skill gems that we're going to run now because of some newly released interactions and the nerf to Circle of Guilt. I'll be dropping the recommendation of linking Skitterbots to Bone Chill, removing Smoke Mine from the recommended gems, and moving some other links around. The 6 link does remain unchanged, however. Our new 4 links are Enlighten, link to Herald of Purity, Summon Skitterbots, and Clarity or Precision, whichever one costs more mana in your build. Next 4 link is Cast when damage taken, a curse of your choice, a Mortal Call, and Clarity or Precision, whichever one costs less. Next is Dash, linked to Second Wind, and Berserk. We'll also throw Ice Golem into this item just because it fits here. The biggest change that we see with these new skill gem setups is Berserk. We're going to be taking Chainbreaker, which gives us an on-demand steroid for about 10 seconds with the rage that we generate. The damage boost is good, but the defensive boost will also help the build immensely. You can also swap Ice Golem for Intimidating Cry if you become hit capped, as that makes the enemy take 10% more damage even though we don't benefit from the other aspects of Intimidating Cry. The next thing that we want to take a look at are the uniques that the build is going to use. As far as optional uniques go, the Circle of Guilt is still good, but the best modifier on it is now plus physical damage instead of plus buff effect. Plus physical damage was already almost as good as plus buff effect before the nerf, so it's now our preferred option and we don't lose very much by taking it. Optimally, we'll want a Circle of Guilt with plus physical damage and minus mana reservation. But if you want to double down on damage, you can go with plus physical damage and plus buff effect. Mark of the Elder is also a great option for the ring slot, having slightly more damage than the Circle of Guilt, but it does offer no mana reservation reduction and comes with the requirement of having a Shaper ring in your other ring slot, which can get expensive. The other unique item that's been given a little bit of flexibility is the chest slot. I still think Kaum's Heart is best in slot, but there are other options. Kintsugi works well with Wind Dancer, which we now take, and is pretty good defensively. Loreweave is also a good option, offering crit, flat physical, and elemental damage, along with increased max resistances. A well-rolled Loreweave is great for damage, but the life is kind of low. Finally, if you feel like min-maxing the character and spending way too much money on it, the build is capable of going full Eternity Shroud if you run 2 rare rings, but it'll be fairly expensive. I also want to go over the leveling process for the build. In the original build guide, I recommended just playing as Split Arrow until level 28. This was a terrible recommendation. You have no early game single target, you're really drop dependent, and it's just so slow. My Mervel kill in Delirium took over 5 minutes with a Split Arrow leveling build. I've since revamped the build guide on the forums to include the new leveling process as Stormblast or Icicle Mines. It's significantly faster, and the leveling process is as follows. At level 2, get and equip Stormblast Mine. At level 4, complete the quest Mercy Mission and link Swift Assembly to your mine. At level 8, complete the quest The Caged Brute and link Added Lightning Damage to the mine. Additionally, link Added Cold if you have a 4 link. At level 12, complete the Siren's Cadence. At this point, you have the option to replace Stormblast Mine with Icicle Mine, but play with both and see what you prefer. They're pretty similar in power and clear. At level 18, complete Sharp and Cruel and socket Trap and Mine damage as your 4th link as soon as you have a 4 link available. If you're already using added cold in your 4 link, replace it with Trap and Mine damage. This 3 or 4 link should work until level 28 just fine. And if you don't have or can't afford a Doomfletch and coated Shrapnels once you hit level 28, you can use this 4 link until the 40s or 50s, but the gearing does move in a completely different direction than Doomfletch Mines, so I would recommend swapping to Doomfletch as soon as you can afford one. The last thing that I want to cover is going to be the 3.11 passive skill tree. There are some significant changes that have been made to the skill tree, most notably completely skipping all these clusters near the ranger start. Instead, we'll be taking those passive points and moving them around, slightly optimizing the tree while picking up newly added passives. Thankfully, this does give us more options for customizing the build than we had before, so I'm only going to present the tree as it would be at level 90. Then I'll give options for where to spend those final skill points as you get up to level 95, 96, maybe even 100. You can decide where you want to focus at that point, offense or defense. So this is what our level 90 tree is going to look like. The first thing you'll notice is that piercing shots is no longer inside the radius of a coated shrapnel, and the passive wheel has been completely redone. We'll be taking the first 2 nodes in here to get up to 1 pierce, and then later on we have the option for adding +2 pierce or getting pierce from other sources. Next, you'll see that we're taking Wind Dancer. This will offer significant defensive bonuses for the build, offsetting any life that we may lose in shifting the tree around. Now we'll move over to the section under the Shadow Start. Here, we're going to take the newly buffed Efficient Explosives wheel and a Jewel Socket. Efficient Explosives is going to be our answer to the mana regen losses from Chainbreaker, as it should take the mana reservation of our mines down significantly, making it easier to sustain that mana regen. Additionally, it offers a 10% chance for mines to detonate a second time, which is not only a flat 10% damage increase, but also triggers the stacking damage bonus of Blast Chain Mines, making this node worth about 15% more damage on its own. As far as this Jewel Socket goes, this is where we will be putting our Lethal Pride Timeless Jewel, in order to convert Perfect Agony into Chainbreaker, the new Rage Generation keystone. Additionally, this location gives us about 30 strength, which helps equip Calm's Heart, and there are 2 notable skills in Radius which can be given good effects from Lethal Pride, such as double damage, flat strength, or life. Last, and probably least, we take the Melding Cluster to make up for the missing life near the Ranger start. It's not a very efficient cluster, but it's the best option we have, and it gets us close to another Jewel Socket. That's it for the changes to the base level 90 passive tree. Next, let's look at what your options are for the next few passive points. Starting at the bottom, if you don't have capped accuracy, you can spend 3 points for Farsight. This is probably the most DPS efficient use of your points until you become hit capped. Now let's look at Point Blank. If you don't have Point Blank on your drill necks, you can spend 2 points here to take Point Blank on the tree. This allows you to continue to use the Pierce implicit on drill neck if you feel like the 1 Pierce we already have is not quite enough for clear. Additionally, you can also move to the Piercing Shots notable for 2 points, giving you 3 pierces. These are quality of life changes, so play the build and see how 1 pierce feels for you before spending points on these. Another option is taking 2 more life nodes beyond Revenge of the Hunted. This is one that I strongly recommend for most people, as we're really hurting for life on the tree. Finally, you can take the Jewel Socket under Melding. In this socket, you can place any jewel of your choice. For offense, I would recommend using another coated shrapnel, as it will give more damage than even a perfect rare jewel, even though this isn't the best spot for a coated shrapnel. The slot also offers tons of utility. You can socket a jewel for life, resist, stats, or damage, whatever you need. In any case, that's everything you need to know to play this build in 3.11's Harvest League. As always, feel free to shoot me a message with any questions in-game or on my Twitch channel, as those are the places I monitor most frequently. I hope this build guide update has been helpful, and if you decide to play this build, I wish you the best of luck, Exiles.